The Netflix adaptation of Karin Slaughter's best-selling novel Pieces of Her was highly anticipated since its initial announcement in 2019. Hype only grew when Oscar-winning actress Toni Collette was revealed to be playing the role of Laura. But as fans of the book, there's always the fear that the show will completely stray away from the source material. Keep on watching as we discuss the big differences between the show and the book. So, is the main storyline the same? Pieces of Her follows Laura and Andy, a mother and daughter who are caught in a dangerous situation when a shooting breaks out in the restaurant where they were celebrating Andy's birthday. You can always expect some changes when there's a book-to-TV adaptation, but how true did the series stay to its source material? While the main plot does remain the same, after Laura brutally murders the restaurant shooter, Andy is sent down a dangerous path in which she discovers she has no clue who her mother actually is. Quite a lot has been changed from Karin Slaughter's version, including a big twist on the ending. At number 9, Alex Maplecroft was the one who took a knife to the hand. First off, the characters involved in the stabbing that influenced Laura's violent actions in the restaurant were different in the book. The show showed a flashback to Laura's past, or Jane's as it was before witness protection, when Alex Maplecroft, the woman they had taken hostage, stabbed Nick Harp through his hand. He then turned around and slit her throat with the knife still stuck in his palm. It was different in the book, however. It was Quarter, a little used character in the book and show, who stabbed Maplecroft through the palm. She then attempted to kill Jane before Nick stepped in and killed her. The restaurant scene was given more importance in the book as well, because instead of just slashing the shooter's throat like in the show, book Laura actually tries to save his life. This was important to the plot because of the shooter's identity. He was a part of a well-connected family of lawyers and cops whose father had recently been killed in the line of duty. The show used the restaurant scene as a jumping-off point, but didn't go into much detail. Next, at number 8, Charlie wasn't in the book, as it was from Andy's perspective. U.S. Marshal Charlie, played by Gil Birmingham, who you may recognize as Thomas Rainwater in Yellowstone, was not a character in the Pieces of Her book. In fact, readers actually had no insight into what Laura was doing since the first night that Andy left town. The present-day story was seen entirely through Andy's eyes, with the flashbacks being narrated by Jane. Laura mostly kept a low profile in the books until the climax, though in the show she played an active role in tracking down whoever was after her. She also repeatedly made contact with Andy to keep her out of danger and tell her what to do, even though Andy didn't really listen. She even goes on to sign out of witness protection halfway through the show, something book Laura never even considered. The mother and daughter did reunite a couple of episodes later, but got separated once more as Laura took matters into her own hands. Sitting at number 7, Paula Kunde was after Laura and Andy, not Jasper and Nick. A big book-to-series change was Paula Kunde's role. The imprisoned Paula was barely brought up at all in the series, when in the book, she was the one who was after Laura and Andy, not Nick and Jasper. She hired a man to go after Laura after she saw her on TV for the restaurant shooting, and it was her who followed Andy to Clara and Elliot's cabin, the latter being called Eli in the show. Her motives were pretty much the same: find out where Laura/Jane had hidden the paperwork that would implicate Jasper for Martin Queller's murder, thus freeing Nick, who had been in prison for 30 years in the book, but on the run for 30 years in the show. Paula was hopelessly in love with Nick in the book and was finally out of jail after serving a 20-year sentence. But she's still doing time in the show, and though she appears to be loyal to Nick, there's really no undercurrent of unrequited love in there. In the book, she held Andy hostage, and when Laura arrived under the guise of handing over the papers, she ended up killing Paula instead. Up next, Andrew died of AIDS, not from being shot. The event that finally convinced Jane to leave Nick's army of the changing world was the death of her brother Andrew, both in the book and the Netflix series. But the circumstances were quite different. In the show, he basically just gets shot while trying to escape the FBI. His illness was drawn out in the books, and his death from AIDS showed what complete monsters Nick and Jasper were and how they treated him. We get to find out through flashbacks in the book that Jane and Andrew were very close, and she even named Andy after him. But even the circumstances of their relationship were changed. In the book, Andrew is a serious junkie until he meets Nick and gets clean, dedicating himself to his cause. When he's dying of AIDS, Jane assumes he contracted it from his drug use and doesn't find out that he's a closeted gay man until after his death. In the show, Andrew doesn't really have a drug problem, and Jane already knows of his sexuality. He's even romantically involved with Nick before the latter meets Jane. And at number 5, Jane had lost several pregnancies to Nick's abuse. Speaking of terrible monsters, Nick was much worse in the books, as all of Laura/Jane's actions in the story were centered around wanting to protect Andy. The book gave a deeper explanation as to why that is. Though Jane's pregnancy with Andy is the only one that's mentioned in the show, the book tells us about the multiple miscarriages she suffered as a victim of domestic abuse. Nick would force her to have abortions and almost killed her on more than one occasion. He would always tell her that they'd keep the next one. The show didn't focus too much on the physical abuse that Nick put Jane through either. One important scene where he brutally beats her is the viewer's first and only indication that he's physically abusive to her. Next, at number 4, Jane didn't slam her hand in the door so she could get out of playing piano. While it is vaguely implied in the show that Martin Queller had been sexually abusive to his daughter Jane, it is stated explicitly in the book. Though he is very controlling and tries to forcefully terminate her pregnancy against her will in the series, he never molests her. Jane had multiple reasons for quitting the piano in the book. She didn't want to use her father's blood money, her instructor had dropped her, and more. But the series took a shortcut and had her slam her hand in a car door so she wouldn't have to go on tour with her father. Next, Clara didn't die in the novel. In the show, Charlie showed Laura pictures of a murdered Clara, which proved that Nick was still somewhere out there and a threat. However, she didn't die in the book. Paula tracked Andy to Clara's home, thinking that Laura's daughter would be able to get some information out of Clara, who suffered from Alzheimer's. Paula then stormed the house, killing Elliot and shooting Clara. In the end, though, Clara was revealed to be safe and very much alive in a long-term care home. Now at number 2, Jasper's role was much smaller in the books. Paula was the only obvious villain in the book after Laura and Andy. Jasper was mentioned as a frequent presidential candidate and a corrupt politician, and his part in Martin's murder and Quelcor's fraud was the same. But the campaign stops, the surveillance of Andy's phone, and the visit to Jasper's house were all added for the series. And number 1, Laura tricked Nick into admitting he was the one who sent Paula after them. The epilogue of the book showed Laura going to visit Nick in prison and manipulating him into admitting that he was the one who had sent Paula after her and Andy. This ensured that her ex-boyfriend and abuser would never get out of jail and that she and Andy would be safe. The series didn't have as much a happy ending as the novel, with Jasper continuing to spy on Andy and getting his hands on information that he could hold over Laura's head as blackmail. While the story of Andy going on a dangerous journey to discover the truth about her mother and escape the people who were trying to kill her was the same in both the book and the TV series, they took many liberties with the adaptation, one of which was to make Laura a much bigger character and thus take advantage of having an incredible actor like Toni Collette on board. There were also a lot of unresolved plot holes and significant cliffhangers in the Netflix show that might hint at them wanting to squeeze out more seasons. That's a wrap for this video. What are your thoughts on these differences? Do you think they made the story better? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.